The holidays are nearly here, and I've got the perfect gifts for the adventurers in your life, or maybe for yourself. Check out my exclusive holiday merch collection featuring cozy hoodies, insulated mugs, warm beanies, and custom gear you won't find anywhere else. Whether you're curling up with your favorite episode or showing off your fandom on the go, the merch store has something special just for you. Your purchase will support the podcast, enabling me to produce more adventure-packed episodes. Shop now by clicking on Virginia Outdoor Adventures merch store in the show notes of your listening app. Hurry, orders must be placed by December 10th for holiday delivery. Hi, friends. I'm often asked how I got started podcasting, how I pivoted from education to entrepreneurship, and what it takes to run a podcast as a small business. I was delighted to sit down for a conversation with my friend Shannon Russell, career coach and host of Second Act Success Career Podcast. Shannon and I met at a podcast conference in Orlando earlier this year and hit it off right away. I'm excited to share my guest appearance on her show, where we discuss the unexpected journey I took from being an elementary school teacher to a nonprofit executive to a podcaster and advocate for our public lands. For those of you who have been interested in a sneak peek behind the scenes of Virginia Outdoor Adventures, this is it. I hope you enjoy my guest appearance on Second Act Success Career Podcast with Shannon Russell.
Are you ready to quit your 9-to-5 job and start a business of your own? Well, you're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the Second Act Success Career Podcast. I am your host, Shannon Russell. I am a former television producer turned business owner, career transition coach, and boy mom. My mission is to help you produce your best life. This podcast will teach you how to get from where you are now to where you want to be, and how to build a business that fits your life and lights you up. Let's get started. Jessica Bowser, welcome to the Second Act Success Podcast. It's so great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be on the other side of the mic for a change.
Exactly. Yes, Jessica and I met at PodFest in Orlando this year. We just kind of ended up sitting next to each other in a bunch of different panels. And yeah, it's just so great to have you here. I think your podcast is so exciting. But let's start from the beginning. Why don't you tell me where your career began?
Well, I started my career as a fourth grade elementary school teacher, and I live in Northern Virginia, so I was teaching the public school system here. And as a 20-something-year-old, I was wearing my heart on my sleeve. I went into teaching because I wanted to change the world, like so many other teachers do. But once I got into it, I realized the reality of teaching is very different from that. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape. It is a female-dominated profession in which the public has a lot of opinions about how teachers should be teaching. And I found that very demeaning and very frustrating because I was a trained professional. I wanted to go in there to do my job. And I felt like I often was hitting these roadblocks where I was being told to do things that were not in the best interest of my students. So for me, that was like, I really had a hard time. I struggled with it a lot. I had some students that were struggling that I couldn't find the help for. And so after some time, I started really getting into the policy and the advocacy side of public education. I thought that I could maybe make a difference that way. And I'm a little bit of a policy nerd. I got really excited about the public policy side of things. Actually started taking some doctoral courses at a local university in policy and advocacy and was sort of going down that road. And then at some point, 7 years into my teaching career, I was spending more time outside my classroom, focusing on policy and advocacy, always involved in a community activity or something going on that I thought would be helpful in supporting teachers and students parents in the community. And so I decided it made sense for me to make the leap into policy and advocacy. I left the classroom, although I never really felt like I left because I felt like my heart was still in the same place. And it was all about supporting students and teachers and their families. And so that's what I did for the next 10 years. I focused on policy and advocacy, and I had all kinds of different jobs, and I did everything from government relations to organizing. My last position was as a nonprofit executive I kind of hit this point where I had reached my dream position. There was a job I had had my eye on for years, and I climbed the ladder until I got there, and I was super excited about it. My heart was totally into it. And then the pandemic happened. And 2020 came along and everything changed, and I was sitting at home trying to decide what I was going to do next. And I started a podcast about outdoor recreation in Virginia. And the reason for that was because I've always been into hiking and biking and camping and outdoor rec in general. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place where I was surrounded by a forest. I was really into like the birds and the wildlife and just the peacefulness of it. I was used to that. I was drawn to that. I had connected with nature when I was young. And so I had that strong connection. And over the years, I was posting like on social media, for example, whenever I would go camping or hiking or visit a new place. And my friends started to say to me, you really ought to write a book or start a blog. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea, but who has time for that? I had a full-time job.
Right.
I served on 6 different boards and commissions. There was not time for writing books and blogs. But during the pandemic, suddenly I was at home like everybody else trying to figure out, what I was going to do. And I don't know where exactly the idea of a podcast came from. Maybe because I myself had just started listening to podcasts for the first time. And I wasn't so naive that I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I knew it wasn't going to be as easy as it seems up front, but I decided to give it a shot. I launched the podcast in spring of 2021. I was sort of building up to it in 2020, launched in 2021, and it just took off. And I don't think anybody was more surprised than me. But when I think back on it, the circumstances were right. People were still having to mask up everywhere they went. They were looking for places to go that were close to home because we still couldn't travel. We needed to be safe, and the outdoors were considered a safe place. And then also there were people who just never knew what was in their own backyards because they never took the time to explore. And now that people had the time and they were stuck at home, they were going, oh, I had no idea this state park was right down the street from me, or I didn't know that I could rent a kayak at this place that's just a few miles from my house. So I think the timing was right, and it just sort of went from there.
Oh, I love the evolution of it. And it's all still within the same realm of education and helping others. And that's
Absolutely.
so cool. So let's just rewind a little bit. So you're in the classroom and you're just hitting these walls. Was it mostly politics happening? Was it dealing with the parents when you really wanted to be dealing with the kids? What was your main struggle that made you say, okay, I need to fight for the rights of these kids and these teachers?
It's funny because when I tell people that I was a teacher and then I left, the response that I almost always get was, oh, I can't imagine how hard it would be to be a teacher right now. These kids and their attitudes and their parents think they're right and they defend their kids and nobody defends the teachers. I never experienced that. And I'm not saying that other people don't. I did not experience that. I worked in a Title I school for a few years, and then I moved to a different school that was right on the border of Title I. Like it almost qualified, but didn't quite. And what I found was that the parents were wonderful, the kids were wonderful, but also I had a really laid back, calm, peaceful classroom. I was the teacher that the administrators gave all the problem children to because I was I was considered the only teacher that could handle them just because I have a real laid back demeanor, and I really enjoyed working with the parents. I really found that parents are very supportive of teachers, but really what it all comes down to is relationships. And I didn't wait until parent teacher conferences to build those relationships with the parents. I was reaching out to them from, day one of school and getting to know parents, because honestly, once you meet the parents, it's like everything about that child just clicks. It's like you realize, oh, now I know why this kid is the way they are. And so I really enjoyed constant communication with parents. And that's a skill and a lesson that I learned that has served me well all throughout my career, even now as a podcaster. Like when I work with sponsors and advertisers, or even my guests or small business owners, it's all about those relationships. And if you can establish relationships, you're going to get much farther. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But yes, it was the bureaucracy and the politics of it. I never could imagine walking into a courtroom and telling a judge how to do her job. And I certainly couldn't imagine walking into a hospital and telling doctors how to do their jobs. Yet everybody had an opinion about how teachers should be doing their jobs. And oftentimes the people who were making those decisions are politicians or administrators who were never teachers themselves. They were never in the trenches doing the job and didn't understand how it worked, but they were making these decisions based on what they thought public opinion was, or what they thought was going to get them public support, rather than what was in the best interest of students and teachers. And so yeah, I got really frustrated with that. And then just the confines of a classroom. I'm a very independent person. I don't like having somebody helicoptering over me, telling me what to do, when to do it. I mean, teachers can't even go to the bathroom, right? Like, we can't even leave our classrooms to take a restroom break, never mind going out to lunch or deciding when you're going to come and go. And I really struggled under those confines. So I work much better when I can make my own decisions and set my own schedule. And so for me, that was just a better option.
Well, you had
Yeah.
7 years. You
Yeah.
you really helped those kids and those families for that time, and then it's interesting that you started getting more involved in advocacy and in your community and then taking that step. What was that like when you left the children and you got into your first role in advocacy and you were starting to learn things differently because that's a corporate environment. That's very different than a school environment.
Right. It was definitely a change. I worked primarily for nonprofits. So that was different too, but it was also very freeing. Like, suddenly people wanted to know my opinion. And I was working in nonprofits where not everyone had been a classroom teacher. And so people were coming to me and saying, "What do you think of this? Is this going to work? What are your thoughts on that?" And I was like, "Wait, somebody cares about my opinion?" And I couldn't believe it. It was very empowering. So suddenly I felt like I was in the right place doing the right thing. I enjoyed working with the community as well, like community leaders,
Mm.
because there's a lot of people out there who work for other nonprofits who also care about public education, even if that's not their primary focus, that make wonderful allies. So it was really exciting to start building my network and working with folks that way too.
Yeah, so you were very connected within your community in Virginia then, it sounds like.
Yes. And even towards the end, when I had reached that executive level, working with elected officials all the time, working with board members, and it's a little wild. It's kind of a hair on fire environment. I mean, I would get phone calls from elected officials at 11:30 at night. And, my cell phone would be ringing at these crazy hours because something happened and they needed to talk to me right then, or that was their only time to talk because they were too busy. And you just accept that they're going to call you when they can call you. And if that's 11:30 p.m., then there you have it. And it never really bothered me. I had people telling me, like, you shouldn't be answering your phone at that hour. Don't set that precedent. But I was so, into my job and what I was doing. And I felt really strongly that I was, doing good things. I would take the calls every single time. And that was fine. But it also meant working late hours, working weekends, holidays. If something happened, my phone was ringing and I needed to be available. And that was just the way it is.
Yeah. But at least you were making a difference, and then the pandemic comes, and was your nonprofit closed during that time? What kind of ended that role for you during 2020?
Yeah, there was a transition point there. Things got a little crazy, and I started questioning, am I really still into this? At that point, it had been over a decade. I can't remember exactly how many years since I had actually been in the classroom. And I was just starting to feel like I think I need a change. I like being at home. I like seeing my spouse every single day. I like not having my cat give me those sad eyes when I'm walking out the door every morning, like, where are you going, human?
Yeah.
There's
Priority
those
shift,
things.
right? Your priority
Yeah,
shift
like
totally changed.
actually knowing what my house looks like in the daylight.
It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is. And sitting outside on my deck and enjoying the change in the seasons and getting to know my neighbors and like things that just I was missing all along. And I think, like many people, I didn't realize I had been missing it all along. And I just wanted a more laid back, peaceful existence as opposed to the hair on fire world that I had been living in.
So it was your choice to say, okay, I'm going to take this time to make this shift, and then podcasting just erupted. I feel like that's what happened with me too. I love listening to podcasts. If they can do it, then I can do it. And I really have something to say and something to talk about. And you just go for it and you see if you enjoy it. Then years later, you're still doing it.
Yeah, it's funny when it comes to podcasters and I think content creators and honestly, probably any career path, they talk about imposter syndrome and how a lot of people feel like they're not an expert in something and therefore, they shouldn't be posing as one or people wouldn't care what they have to say. I don't know. Maybe I just have a different sense of self-esteem, but I was like, no, I never felt that. Like I never had that imposter syndrome. I'll be the first person to tell you I'm not an expert in anything, but I do build relationships with people who are experts. And I feel like I'm the go-between. I take the information that people want the community to have and I put it out there. And so for me, it's part educator, part communicator, collecting and putting together the information that people want and putting it in a format that they can digest.
In part advocate too, because you're advocating for your community, for Virginia.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny how the skill set transferred because I did not expect that either. You don't think of podcasting as having, a certain skill set. You think of maybe broadcasting or radio or, something where you're talking into the mic. That's really only a teeny tiny part of it, right? Like that's the part that you hear, but it's what's going on in the background that you don't see or hear. So some of the skills that have transferred over are communications, building relationships, networking, and then being organized. As a teachers have to be super organized, being on top of things, and just having an incredibly strong work ethic. Because when you're working for yourself, it's really easy to be like, oh, it's the first 70-degree day in spring. I just want to go out and hike, but I can't, right? Like I know that I have to stay home because there are certain things that I need to do. And especially with the type of content that I put out about outdoor recreation, people assume that I spend my whole life outdoors. And maybe I spend an hour on a microphone, but the reality is, like everybody else, I'm at a computer pretty much every day. And actually, I'm probably at my computer more than most people are because I'm running a small business. I don't have a 9 to 5. I am working from the time I get up to the time I go to bed, 7 days a week. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend, a holiday, like I am here grinding away. And that's just the way it is.
And that's how your business will grow, right? You're putting all of yourself into it and so much love and sweat and tears.
That's what they say. Although there's something to be said about work-life balance. I haven't gotten there yet. So if you're going to ask me any questions about work-life balance, I am not the person to ask about that because I have almost none.
And I don't think it truly, truly exists. I have to say, I might be in the minority, but I think it's the fact that you are controlling your time. Like, yes, you are, but you enjoy the work you're doing. And there's something to be said about working around the clock as a small business owner, that it's your clock, your time, your work. You're not doing it for someone else. You're not being told to do it. And so that if you did want to go and hike in the middle of the day on a Tuesday, that's your call, right? The only person who's going to yell at you is yourself.
That's true. That's how it is in theory, right? But there are definitely times where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm a realist. If that's going to come through in this conversation, I'm absolutely a realist. And there are definitely days where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Like if I had a 9 to 5, I could do my job within those hours and then I could have a life outside of it as opposed to just working all the time, which is what I'm doing now. And I would have job security and I would have benefits and, maybe I should do like there are definitely days when I'm like, maybe that would be a better option, especially when somebody sends me a job posting for something that I know I might be a good fit for. And then I really struggle because then it's like, okay, this seems like an easy out, but at the same time, I've put all of this hard work and effort into the podcast and getting that to a place where it's functioning as a business. Do I really want to throw that all out the window? And the struggle's real. The struggle is real, especially when I'm having a rough day and I'm like, gosh, I don't know how much longer this is sustainable for. But what keeps me going is when I get a message from a listener saying, Jessica, your podcast means so much to me. This got me through the pandemic, or this helped me deal with a loss or a death in my family, or, I had a a strained relationship with my adult child. And then we got some ideas about hiking outdoors and we started doing that together. And now we're rebuilding our relationship. Like, I get these messages that I never imagined would come out of this project. I mean, this was a pandemic project. This was something to do for fun while I was at home trying to figure out what to do with my time. It has turned into something entirely unexpected. I mean, it has impacted people in ways that I never could have imagined. And also, I have found myself in an interesting position where I get to educate people about things that park rangers and agencies that manage our public lands, like, they want people to know, they want the public to know, but they don't have the platform to get the information out. And I have become that platform in a lot of ways. And sometimes that's conservation, sometimes it's safety, sometimes it's responsible recreating, all the things like that people don't know about when they're outside recreating, or they just don't think about, like, even the policy side of it. Like, getting back to the policy and the politics, our public lands are public, right? So they need to be funded. And the Virginia General Assembly doesn't fully fund our Virginia state parks and other resources. And most people don't know that. So, they go to a state park and they're like, oh, the pool is closed. This place stinks. We're not coming back. And they leave. They don't think to call their legislator and say, please fully fund our parks so that we can have all these amenities back. So it's that type of messaging that I get to share too. And just informing people about, if these places mean something to you and you want them to exist for your kids and your grandkids, then here's what you need to do.
So your podcast, if we haven't mentioned it yet, is Virginia Outdoor Adventures. And so you talk all about recreation and the outdoors in your community in Virginia, or the whole state of Virginia, I should say. And so you started your episodes just about this. Were you hiking and then coming back and talking about it? Like, what was the evolution of this podcast? And I really want to lean into the fact that you do have sponsors and this is a business and you're making money from this podcast, which isn't always the way. So really tell me about the evolution of making this podcast project a business.
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolution because I had no idea what I was doing in the beginning. I honestly did not know what direction I wanted to go in. I didn't know what my audience was interested in. I knew that I wanted to have guests on every episode. And so I just started with my network. I literally reached out to almost every person I knew and said, I'm starting this podcast about outdoor recreation in Virginia. Who do you know that might be a good guest? And started getting references and different names started coming to me. And then I would ask those people, who do you know? And then pretty soon it mushroomed. But initially I was just interviewing people who I thought were interesting. Some of them might have started a nonprofit. Some of them might have done the AmeriCorps program. Some of them might just be people who are really enthusiastic about kayak camping. Maybe somebody rode their bike across the country. It was just, who do I think is interesting here? And then I would interview that person and then I would watch the stats. And I've learned over time, like, how to pay attention to what people really want. So it has evolved. And now I mostly focus on places to go and things to do because I've learned that that's really what people are looking for. And then I weave in other information that might be of importance. For example, I had somebody ask me recently if I would do an episode about search and rescue. And I said, I would never do an episode about search and rescue because hardly anybody would listen to it. If I put out an episode about search and rescue, that's not places to go and things to do. Like, it might appeal to a few people, but it's not going to appeal to my general audience. So instead, what I have done in the past, I did an episode about waterfalls of Shenandoah National Park. And the guest was a ranger who also happened to be the lead for the search and rescue team in the park. And he talked about safety and he talked about what happens when somebody goes on a waterfall hike and they're unprepared and has to be rescued and the resources that go into that rescue. So the information is there and people are learning from that, but that's not the focus of the episode. It's like the teacher me is like, how do I get people to learn about this stuff? And how do I draw people in without turning them away because they're like, oh, I don't need to know about search and rescue.
Right. That's a downer. I don't want to talk about that, the waterfalls. That's so smart. And I love that you really did study the stats and look at what your audience wants. And a great thing to mention for any wannabe podcasters that are listening is that you niche down. You didn't talk about outdoor adventures in the great US. You really studied and focused on Virginia. So that makes your audience very focused. And for people who might think, oh, the more you put it out there, the broader you are, the more reach. It's not, it's kind of the opposite of that,
It
right? We
is.
learned that you want to niche down in any business really, and then you really target to those listeners. And
Yes.
you've done that so
Yes.
well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I first started this, I had people telling me that I needed to do the whole country, or I needed to do the whole East Coast, or I needed to include all the neighboring states. And some of the people who told me this, I mean, one friend of mine is a multi-million-dollar business owner, and he started from scratch. And the guy is really smart. And I was like, that's not what my gut is telling me. My gut is telling me from my experience working in the community that community matters and people care about their neighbors and what's nearby to them. And that has so far proven to be true. And there is no shortage of podcasts or social media accounts or creators out there who are trying to cover everything. I honestly don't know how they could possibly do it. And for me, like when I have a guest on my show, I meet with that guest in person before they come on the show. It gives me an opportunity to get to know them, but it also means that I'm going to where they are so that they can share with me what their passions are and what matters to them. And I can actually experience it with them so that when we're talking about it in an episode, that relationship has already been established and listeners hear it. And I can talk about it from some vantage point of experience instead of just asking a list of random questions and letting them answer it. We can actually have a conversation about the experience and what it's like. And then I think listeners go, oh, wow, this is something that I can do, right here in my backyard. And also it helps really identify folks as this part of this larger community. We are all Virginians here, like in Virginia, and this is our backyard. And this is something that we should be proud of. We have beautiful landscapes here, everything from the ocean and the Chesapeake Bay to the valleys, the lakes, and the Appalachians. I mean, there's a huge variety and we have a rich culture and history here, and it's something to be proud of. And that's something that I want people to connect to, because when they make a connection, they're going to come back. With my podcast, people feel like they're part of this community. Everything that they're hearing is something that is accessible to them. It's not a big bucket list dream. It's something they could do this weekend if they want. And I think that resonates with folks.
Yeah, you've done a great job of really narrowing in on who your audience is and who you want to serve. And then how has that led to your sponsors? Because I really want to dive into how you are making money from this podcast through your sponsors and through who are also community businesses. And just talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That niching down has everything to do with my ability to monetize the podcast. And to be clear, I'm monetizing the podcast because, as you know, like it's not free. Some people think that a podcast is as simple as talking into a mic and then putting it out there for the world to consume, but it comes with a lot of costs, and those costs need to be covered. And if I'm also not going to be working because I'm investing all this time and money into a podcast, then I have to make it worth it. But if I hadn't niched down, I don't know that I would have any advertisers or sponsors, or very few.
True.
And the reason why this works so well is because podcasting can reach a very niche audience. And if you're an advertiser or you're looking to advertise and you want to hit a target audience, I and any other podcaster should be able to provide the data to show who is listening to their show. So if I have an outdoor brand that is selling tents, obviously, my audience is going to be very open to an ad about tents or sleeping bags or, an alpaca hoodie or whatever it's going to be. But it's not just brands. I have a lot of tourism. They're called DMOs. That's an industry term. It stands for Destination Marketing Organization. So there are regional DMOs all around the state, and they are also trying to get people who are interested in outdoor recreation to come to their locations. And not just because they want to hike or whatever, but the outdoor industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. When people travel to hike or to camp or, to visit parks, they're spending their money in that area. They're bringing money to the region. So they're staying in hotels or in cabins. They are buying gas for their car. They are eating out. They might do some of the local attractions in the area. They might hire a guide or do a tour. So there's a lot of money to be spent in an area. So tourism DMOs are also really interested in working with me because they can reach people who are already right here in Virginia. So if there's a small county somewhere in Virginia and they're trying to expand their local economy to include outdoor recreation, this is a great opportunity for them to do that. Also, podcasting is not expensive compared to other forms of advertising. I mean, if you were to run an ad in a big magazine like Outside, for example, or Blue Ridge Outdoors, I mean, it's $16,000 or so for a quarter page ad. And then you don't even know who's looking at it. And of the people who look at it, how many are acting on it? There's no way to measure that. In podcasting, it's different. I know exactly how many people have downloaded and listened to an episode, and I can provide that data to sponsors and advertisers. So they know who they're reaching. They know what they're paying for. And that's really appealing to a lot of folks. But it's that target audience and it's that return on investment that's measurable that I'm able to do it. Now, you've probably heard the industry standards. They say that, what is it, $20 per ad for every 1,000 downloads or something like that. I was monetizing at 300 downloads an episode years ago. I mean, when I hit that point, that's when I got my first sponsor. And it was the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources that actually reached out to me and said they wanted to work with me. And I said, would you be willing to be a sponsor? And when they said yes, I knew things were going somewhere. I was like, I don't have that many downloads compared to most podcasts, but I have an audience that they're trying to reach. They're mostly, or they historically have had a lot of hunters and anglers as their supporters and their followers, and they are trying to reach a broader audience of outdoor recreationists. They have over 40 wildlife management areas across the state. They want people to use it for something other than hunting. And so my podcast was a way for them to start getting that messaging out, as well as messaging about the work they do with wildlife in the area. A lot of wildlife comes back to tourism. There's a herd of elk that have been reintroduced in Southwest Virginia, and the tourism dollars that are coming into that area from people who want to go on these tours to see the elk is huge. And so this platform is a way to get that information out because most people are like, we have elk in Virginia? I had no idea. So yeah, it's really being able to reach a target audience that makes all the difference.
And I like it too because you're serving your listeners as well. They're not getting these ads for something that has nothing to do with your content. So it's all
Yes.
really aligned. How many times do we listen to a podcast and there's some random ad for a senior living community or something that just doesn't pertain to us?
Insurance. Yeah,
Yeah. And so I
exactly.
think that's just really symbiotic, how you have everything working together and tying back to you educating and helping your community. It just all comes back to it. And this passion project, COVID project, to now you've got this business that is really supporting you and your family, and you seem so happy you're doing what you want to be doing.
There are good days and bad days. I would call it a roller coaster, honestly.
Yeah.
It's, people see the good up front. I'm not going to get on Instagram Live and be like, you guys, today really sucked. Maybe I wake up to a message from somebody saying, I just listened to this episode and it was so fantastic. And thank you so much for everything you're doing for the community. And then I open up my email and I find out that one of my advertisers has pulled out. And then I'm like, okay, there's a whole chunk of money that I was depending on that's now gone. And then I get another text message from somebody saying, hey, we really love you to be our keynote speaker at our upcoming tourism conference. And then something else crazy happens, right? And it's like, it's this up and down and up and down. And if you can't ride the emotional roller coaster, you should just get off of it because this is really what it is like on a daily basis. It's the constant grind, but then it's also the really high highs and the really low lows. And it's rough sometimes. It's rough.
Yeah, I completely agree. You don't know what your day is going to be like until you're there. And I have to say, whenever those really negative down times or those disappointments happen, I just take a breath and shut the computer because I have the ability to do that. And you can go for a walk. You know the places to go in Virginia. Just go outside and just reframe because it's one day and tomorrow will be different. So you're right. It's a roller coaster of emotions all the time. And that is with probably running any size business. big or small, but being a solopreneur, you know, it's you. It's me. That's it. That's who's on our team. And so you're handling the brunt of everything yourself. So it's a lot, but
It's truly a lot. And, podcasting, I view it as three different jobs. There's the content creation, there's the promotion of every episode and of the show as a whole. And then there's working with the sponsors and advertisers, so the monetization piece. Each of those three things should be a full-time job by itself. And here I am trying to do all three of these things pretty much on my own. I do have an editor, so that takes a task off my hands that I just couldn't deal with on my own. Like, I don't want to do it, so I have somebody else help me. And then I have somebody who helps me with just random tasks. Most of them are like communications or smaller things. And that helps a lot. She's wonderful. But I have found that a lot of things I just have to do on my own. Like I've had a business coach for a while, and I talked to my business coach about this, and I said, I need help. I'm drowning. And she looked at me and said, girl, nobody's going to sell it better than you. That's just the way it is.
yeah, that is the main part of your job, is those relationships and the selling of your product, your podcast.
Yeah, exactly. I'm learning as I go.
Yes. So one question now that you have this podcast, you're making money from it, can you imagine yourself back in the classroom?
I couldn't have imagined myself back in the classroom 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I hung on to it for a really long time. Like, I had all of my classroom supplies in a storage unit for years. I was paying for the storage unit. I even renewed my teaching license. So and that requires like taking classes and showing that you've met certain requirements. I renewed it until I couldn't renew it anymore. And it was a lot. It was hard for me to let it go. I think there's an emotional connection. I mean, that career, it does something to you. It changes you in a way that it's difficult to describe. I mean, it's been more than a decade since I've been out of the classroom, but I still have dreams where it's the first day of school and the kids are lined up outside my door and I'm not ready. I don't have my classroom ready. I don't have my lesson plans ready, and I'm panicking. And all these years later, I still have that dream on repeat. So, it was hard for me to let it go, but I also don't see myself ever going back. I mean, I've thought about it. I've thought about just subbing, like being somebody's long-term sub. I can't even imagine that. The profession it evolves so fast and so rapidly that I feel like I would be stepping into unknown, unfamiliar territory. And I miss the kids. There are things about it that I really do miss, but I don't see myself back in there full time with somebody telling me what to do around the clock. I enjoyed it when I did it, and I have no regrets, but I also realized that it was time to move on, and I don't have any regrets about that either.
And I love that you have reflected on it, because you are still a teacher, right? You can always say, I did this and it led me to this next step, and it led me to this third act. And so everything happens and you just take those skills with you, and you've used them so well. You've utilized them in both of your careers since then, and you keep going.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You learn from past experiences and you carry them forward with you.
Name one thing that these different chapters in your life have taught you.
If there's one thing I know for sure, is that I never know what is coming next. You can't predict it. And that's not to say that goal setting isn't a good idea, or having a vision for where you want to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. I've always had those visions. I've always had goals. Not one of them has come true, I don't think. Maybe in small increments. But, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, when I was just getting into my dream job, if what I would be doing 5 years from now, if somebody would have said, you'd no longer be in this field, you'd be a podcaster, I would not have believed it for a second. I don't know if I would have known what a podcast was.
Right.
So I thought I was going to be a teacher my whole life, or my whole career. That didn't happen. I thought I was going to be in my dream job for the rest of my career. That didn't happen. Now here I am doing something completely unexpected. So the one thing I've learned is that there's just no way to know what's coming next. You just have to be open to whatever possibilities might arise.
So Jessica, where can my audience connect with you, whether they're in Virginia or not? Where are all the places to follow you?
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Virginia Outdoor Adventures. If you want more information about the podcast or about me, that can be found on my website, which is virginiaoutdooradventures.com. And if you're looking to listen to the podcast, Virginia Outdoor Adventures is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yay. You just said it just like a podcaster.
That's right.
And I'm going to link to everything. And I just love that we got to connect and at the podcast conference and that you're here sharing your story. You really have evolved in such a special way throughout your career. And I love everything that you're doing. And I'm so proud to know you. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Shannon. It's been a pleasure to be here. It's been a pleasure getting to know you too. And I value this relationship. You are also doing amazing things for our community. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Jessica. Excited for what's next for both of us.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found some gems of inspiration and some takeaways to help you on your path to Second Act Success. To view show notes from this episode, visit secondactsuccess.co. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Reviews only take a few moments and they really do mean so much. Thank you again for listening. I'm Shannon Russell, and this is Second Act Success.